Today we're counting down the top 10 sympathetic movie villains, characters you almost root for, even when you know you shouldn't. 1. Norman Bates, Psycho, 1960.
The one she allows I might be capable of doing.
Norman Bates, portrayed by Anthony Perkins in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, is a villain whose crimes are shocking, but his mental state makes him a deeply sympathetic figure. Norman's split personality and his tragic relationship with his domineering mother create a perfect storm that leads to his murderous actions. Unlike many villains, Norman isn't motivated by greed or revenge, but by a fractured mind that compels him to act in horrifying ways. His fragility, quiet demeanor, and desire for connection make him more of a tragic figure than a cold-blooded killer. Despite his horrific actions, you can't help but feel a sense of pity for him, especially as the psychological roots of his behavior are revealed. Norman's battle with his own identity adds a heartbreaking layer to his villainy, making him a sympathetic yet deeply terrifying antagonist.
I think I've talked to you all I want to.
2. Michael Corleone, The Godfather series, 1972 to 1990. Al Pacino's portrayal of Michael Corleone is one of the most nuanced and tragic characters in film history. Starting as a war hero with no intention of joining the family's criminal empire, Michael's journey from reluctant heir to ruthless mob boss is both tragic and inevitable. His descent into villainy is driven by a need to protect his family at all costs. But as he sinks deeper into the criminal underworld, he becomes increasingly isolated and cold. Michael's actions, murder, betrayal, and manipulation, are horrifying, yet you understand why he does what he does. His transformation from idealistic son to hardened mafia leader is a slow, painful process that leaves him emotionally distant and morally compromised. Despite his monstrous actions, you sympathize with Michael because his choices, though dark, are driven by love, loyalty, and a desire to preserve what matters most to him, his family.
The mind softens.
3. Roy Batty, Blade Runner, 1982.
Then a repress of protein that locks the operating cell.
In Blade Runner, Rutger Hauer's portrayal of Roy Batty is both haunting and deeply human. Batty is a replicant, an artificial human, fighting for his right to live beyond his pre-programmed 4-year lifespan. His desperation to survive drives him to commit violent acts, but at its core, his journey is about the fundamental human desire for life. Batty's intelligence, physical prowess, and philosophical reflections make him a compelling figure, but it's his yearning for more time and the injustice of his existence that makes him sympathetic. His famous Tears in Rain monologue at the end of the film is one of the most poignant moments in cinema, as Batty reflects on the beauty of life and the fleeting nature of existence. In his final moments, Batty shows compassion and mercy, making him more human than the people hunting him, and leaving viewers with a profound sense of loss and empathy for the villain.
Nothing the god of biomechanics wouldn't let you in.
4. Candyman, 1992. Tony Todd's portrayal of Candyman is a chilling and tragic figure in horror history. Once a talented artist and the son of a former slave, Candyman was brutally murdered by a racist mob in the 1800s after falling in love with a white woman. His hand was severed and he was covered in honey, left to die a horrific death. Now a vengeful spirit, Candyman is driven by the need to perpetuate his legend by inducing fear and violence. While his actions are terrifying, his backstory evokes deep sympathy. He is a victim of racial injustice and unimaginable cruelty, seeking revenge not just for himself, but for the suffering inflicted on him and others like him. Candyman's story is both a haunting reflection of systemic violence and a reminder of how revenge can turn even the most tragic figures into monsters. 5. Count Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992.
Welcome to my home.
Gary Oldman's portrayal of Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula is a haunting and sympathetic take on one of the most iconic villains in literature and cinema. This version of Dracula is not just a monster who preys on the innocent. He's a tragic figure who has been cursed with immortality after renouncing his faith when his beloved wife took her own life. His centuries-long existence is marked by loneliness, grief, and a longing for the love he lost. Dracula's actions, though monstrous, are driven by this deep, eternal sorrow, making him a villain you can't help but pity. His desire to reunite with his long-lost love, reincarnated in Mina, makes his villainy more about heartache and loss than sheer malevolence. Oldman's performance infuses Dracula with vulnerability, and despite the terror he unleashes, you can feel his anguish and desperation. 6. Norman Stansfield, Leon, the Professional, 1994. Gary Oldman's portrayal of Norman Stansfield in Leon, the Professional, is both terrifying and oddly compelling. As a corrupt DEA agent, Stansfield is ruthless, erratic, and violent. But it's his bizarre behavior and addiction to drugs that make him so fascinating. His intense outbursts of violence seem almost uncontrollable, hinting at a man who's not only dangerous, but also deeply unstable. While undeniably evil, his unpredictable nature and occasional vulnerability in moments of emotional intensity make him strangely pitiable. Stansfield's erratic mental state, combined with his delusional sense of control, suggests a man trapped by his own demons, making him one of the most memorable and disturbing villains in modern cinema. 7. Gollum, The Lord of the Rings, 2001 to 2003. Gollum, played by Andy Serkis, is a character torn between his dual personalities, one part clinging to his humanity, the other consumed by the power of the One Ring. His tragic descent into madness began long before The Lord of the Rings, when the ring corrupted his soul, turning him into the creature he is. Gollum's obsession with the ring is both heartbreaking and terrifying, as it represents his only source of happiness and torment. What makes Gollum particularly sympathetic is that he was once an innocent creature, but his greed and lust for the ring consumed him. His internal battle, as glimpses of his former self occasionally emerge, creates moments where the audience can't help but feel sorry for him. In those moments of vulnerability, you see a creature who has been destroyed by his desires, making Gollum both a victim and a villain. 8. Dr. Octopus, Spider-Man 2, 2004. Alfred Molina's portrayal of Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2 turned the character from a comic book villain into a deeply sympathetic figure. Dr. Otto Octavius begins as a well-meaning scientist with noble intentions, but after a disastrous experiment goes wrong, his mechanical arms fuse with his body, corrupting his mind. The artificial intelligence in the arms drives him to madness, pushing him to villainy as he seeks to rebuild his experiment no matter the cost. What makes Dr. Octopus sympathetic is his tragic fall from grace. He was a man of intellect and integrity, but the accident and the influence of the arms turned him into a monster. His internal struggle between the man he once was and the villain he's become makes his character both tragic and compelling. By the end of the film, he redeems himself, but his journey is a heartbreaking one of lost potential and corrupted genius.
Keep calm! It's only a spike! It'll soon stabilize!
9. Thanos, Avengers, Infinity War, 2018. Josh Brolin's portrayal of Thanos in Avengers. Infinity War presented the character as a villain with deeply sympathetic motivations. While his plan to wipe out half of the universe's population is undeniably horrifying, Thanos genuinely believes he's saving the universe from overpopulation and resource depletion. His rationale is that by sacrificing half, he can ensure the survival of the whole, a twisted but ultimately well-meaning goal in his mind. Thanos' love for his adopted daughter Gamora is one of the film's most emotional arcs. His willingness to sacrifice her for what he sees as the greater good adds complexity to his character. He's not just a power-hungry tyrant, he's a villain who believes in his cause, and that belief makes him all the more tragic and compelling. His resolve to follow through with his plan, despite the personal pain it causes him, makes him a villain that audiences can't help but empathize with, even if they disagree with his methods.
Even
10. Arthur Fleck, Joker, 2019.
Don't let it get me down.
Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Arthur Fleck in Joker is one of the most complex and divisive villain origins in recent memory. Arthur's descent into madness is driven by a society that neglects and abuses him, both mentally and physically. He's a man struggling with mental illness in a world that doesn't care. And as he's pushed further to the margins, his grip on reality slips. While his actions, murder, chaos, and violence, are undeniably horrifying, the film paints a picture of a man who was failed by the system. Arthur's transformation into the Joker is a tragic look at how neglect, isolation, and untreated mental illness can push someone over the edge. His need for validation, combined with the cruelty he faces, makes him a villain whose suffering is as much a part of his story as his crimes. You can't help but feel sympathy for him, even as he becomes the embodiment of chaos.
Oh, why is everybody so upset about these guys?
And there you have it, 10 villains who make you feel a little bit conflicted. While their actions may be villainous, their motivations and backstories add layers of complexity that make them more than just bad guys. Do you agree with our list? Which sympathetic villain did we miss? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into cinema's most iconic characters. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.